To breach Stryker's defense, Brooke orders an artillery barrage. Bursts of projectiles and Congreve rockets cause confusion in the American ranks. Through clouds of musket smoke, British Lieutenant George Gleig remembers the fog of war.
Volley upon volley having been given, we were now advanced within less than 20 yards of the American line. Yet such was the denseness of the smoke that it was only when a passing breeze swept away the cloud for a moment that either force became visible to the other.
Stryker, seeing his line threatened by oncoming British forces, calls for a retreat. But unlike the militiamen who scattered at Bladensburg, he retires his troops in good order to the very outskirts of Baltimore. Meanwhile, in the harbor, Major George Armistead, the commander at Fort McHenry, views the approaching British fleet from the ramparts.
Prepare to fire!
Sir, they're out of our range!
Give your guns full elevation.
From the number of barges and the well-known situation of the enemy, I have no doubt but that an assault will be made this night upon the fort.
Aboard the 50-gun frigate HMS Surprise, Captain Edward Codrington reflects the confidence of the British Navy in a letter to his wife.
The work of destruction is now about to begin, and there will be many broken heads tonight. The bomb vessels, brigs, the frigates are all pushing up the river with an eagerness which must annoy the enemy, I presume as much as it delights me.
Dawn, September 13th. The bombardment of Fort McHenry commences. From their position 2 miles away, heavily armed British bomb ships unleash an early 19th century version of shock and awe.
This is the most powerful, destructive force known to man in 1814. 1,500 of these are thrown at the fort, exploding 190-pound cast-iron bombs. This is what's striking fear into the hearts of the Baltimore defenders.
Miles from Fort McHenry, the citizens of Baltimore feel the power of the British artillery volleys. A local newspaper reports.
The houses in the city were shaken to their foundations, for never, perhaps from the time of invention of cannon to the present day, were number of pieces fired with so rapid succession.
8 miles away, a 35-year-old Georgetown lawyer named Francis Scott Key watches the bombardment aboard an American truce vessel. Just prior to the battle, he had arrived at the British fleet in Chesapeake Bay to secure the release of a friend. But before they can leave, the bombardment of Fort McHenry begins, and they're trapped. Key now finds himself in the middle of the storm.
Francis Scott Key is amazed and appalled by the bombardment that's going on. The absolute foundations of both Fort McHenry and Baltimore are being rocked by these 200-pound bombs that are being hurled at the fort.
As the Royal Navy bombards Fort McHenry, Colonel Arthur Brooke resumes the infantry attack on Baltimore. When he comes on the position in Hampstead Hill, he is amazed at what he sees. Strongly emplaced American troops behind extensive earthworks, well armed with artillery. While the British infantry advance on Baltimore, the bombardment of Fort McHenry continues into the afternoon. Heavy rain and 13-inch mortar shells deluge the fort. At about 2 p.m., a mortar shell arcs over the walls, killing a gun commander and wounding several soldiers. Private Isaac Monroe recalls the devastation inside the stronghold.
Sergeant Clem was killed by my side, a bomb bursting over our heads. A piece the size of $1, 2 inches thick, passed through his body.
Moments later, a bomb makes a direct hit on this powder magazine, where over 250,000 pounds of powder are being stored. This is the main powder magazine for the defense of Baltimore itself. If this goes, the entire fort will go. If the fort goes, the city may very well fall.
But miraculously, the shell fails to ignite, saving Fort McHenry from utter destruction. Despite the unprecedented onslaught, American troops inside the fort counter the attack with lethal force of their own. By nightfall, the bombardment has lasted more than 12 hours. The sky over Fort McHenry is ablaze with lightning and rocket glare, as deafening thunderclaps and artillery blasts shake and rattle all of Baltimore. One U.S. Marine is awestruck by the dazzling but deadly sound and light show.
I think the handsomest sight I ever saw was during the bombardment, to see the bombs and rockets flying.
An order comes to extinguish the lights in all of Baltimore to prevent the British from seeing any strategic landmarks. Now, only the periodic flashes of lightning and exploding rockets illuminate Fort McHenry. Inside, Major Armistead and his men know they must hold out. The fate of the city, perhaps the nation itself, is in their hands. The only way Francis Scott Key and the people of Baltimore will know if they're successful is if the flag above the fort still waves. They watch, hope, and wait. Throughout the night of September 13, 1814, the British Navy keeps up its bombardment of Fort McHenry in Baltimore Harbor. One British midshipman recalls the relentless artillery attack.
All the night, the bombardment continued with unabated vigor. The hissing of rockets and the fiery shells glittered in the air, threatening destruction as they fell. Whilst to add solemnity to this scene of devastation, the rain fell in torrents. The thunder broke in mighty peals after each successive flash of lightning.
Inside the fort, with the smaller storm flag now flying above, Major George Armistead's men return fire.
The only means we had of directing our fire was by the blaze of their rockets and the flashes of their guns.
Those citizens of Baltimore who haven't already fled the city look on in awe and horror.
And Francis Scott Key is one of them. Throughout the night, he paces the deck of his ship in the darkness, hoping the explosions would continue, because if there's silence, it might mean the fort had capitulated.
While the Royal Navy shells the fort, Colonel Arthur Brooke, commander of the British Land Force, prepares a final attack on Hampstead Hill on the edge of the city. To aid Brooke, Vice Admiral Cochrane orders a diversionary attack against the western slope of Fort McHenry with a flotilla of 20 barges armed with artillery. But the Americans don't fall for the ploy. Instead, the American artillery pounds away at the diversionary force. In the pre-dawn darkness of September 14th, Brooke makes a momentous decision. He orders a retreat back to the ships.
September 14th, dawn. At 4:30 in the morning, the American gun batteries here at Fort McHenry fall silent. But the bombardment continues until 7:30 that morning by the British Royal Navy. And then after 25 hours of intense bombardment, silence covers the waters of the Patapsco River and Baltimore Harbor.
That silence follows the order to stop the bombing of Fort McHenry. The nighttime flotilla operation had failed. All the while, the ragged, rain-soaked storm flag still waves defiantly over the fort's ramparts. Cochrane understands that to continue fighting is futile. One by one, each British warship that only minutes before had unleashed an unprecedented eruption of artillery and rocket fire now weighs anchor and quietly sets sail into the morning mist. An American officer recalls the sight.
The enemy has been severely drubbed, as well by his army and his navy, and now it is retiring down the river after expending many tons of shot, from 1,800 to 2,000 shells, and at least 700 or 800 rockets.
It is a moment to remember. It is a moment now that would define the importance of Fort McHenry in the War of 1812, because something is about to happen.